use GM canola to maintain GM-free status.
So I'm going to throw something out here. I think your best buffer zone is that Pacific and Indian Ocean.
If they're reseed so easily, then why is the seeding an issue? I mean, you talk about how it's expensive to buy new seed, but you're saying the crops reseed themselves.
Well, yeah, that's, I mean, it spreads around. It's not at the appropriate moment when it spreads around that the crop shows up. Generally, volunteer crops for farmers that are planted are not very, don't yield very well. I mean, a percentage of them there causes market loss and an assortment of things. The other thing is that because of the intellectual property rights attached to the genes contained in the herbicide canola, if you find those plants growing in your field, you have no rights to save that seed. You've waived those rights in the technology use agreements that you signed in order to access that, and the company can come after you and say, well, really, this is my plant, it's not your plant. We don't, by Canadian jurisprudence, it doesn't matter how it got there, and you know, if it's in significant numbers, you're responsible to pay the fees anyway, so you're locked into this situation where you'll buy the seed on an annual basis. Once you've done this, once you've got into this process, it's very hard to step back, and the varieties simply are not available anymore for farmers that choose to exit this. All of the varietal development, the financing of research has been largely a private government cooperative system where public plant breeders have to access private funds first in order to get government funding afterwards. What's interesting for the private funders is a seed where they can maximize profits. And a seed that has a patent attached to it, a GM seed, patent attached to it with the gene, is the most profitable because they are able to generate revenues from the enforcement of that patent. And that enforcement of that patent is done very draconian.
What's the advantage of, sorry?
So the scientific studies here suggest that what you're saying about the buffer zones is not right. We're saying past 20 kilometres the amount of contamination is minuscule, and you could still legitimately call your crop organic because it has 0.001%. Surely that's a legitimate argument.
Well, I think that maybe it was unfortunate I chose 20 kilometers as a number. The reality is that in a region that's growing canola, at least in the region that I live in, no one is going to be able to have a buffer zone, or no one will even entertain it. They'll farm right up to the next neighbor's piece, and this calls into question issues of who's responsible. Why would a farmer have to give up some of his land in order to maintain some degree of security from something that was introduced that he didn't want to have there in the first place? And I think Arnold can deal with that, but these liability questions are front and foremost in the issue when you introduce this. You know, who's responsible for contamination? Who's responsible for loss of markets? Who pays the price? And in almost every respect in the Canadian situation, by the technology use contracts, clauses in them, farmers have taken that cost. They've taken that economic hit, and those supplying the seeds have picked up the benefits through the patent protections by having a monopoly on the seeds and being able to sell them at a much higher price.
You talk about loss of markets, but this is something of a juggernaut. What's going to be the advantage for those who really hold out or can hold out anywhere in the world and produce non-GM canola? What is going to be the advantage in the long term when the world seems to be shifting this other way?
Well, I mean, the Canadians have gone to the extent of launching actions at the WTO against the Europeans. The assumption was in Canada with the introduction of GM canola that the Europeans would cave relatively quickly. They never have. I don't believe they will. The Australians have been able to pick up that market. It's been an ongoing problem for us to maintain the Japanese market. It requires extensive diplomatic efforts on the part of the Canadian government. And what I would say is that if you're non-GM, no market doors are closed to you. If you're GM, doors close. So it's pretty clear that it's, at least to me, that it would be advantageous to be non-GM if you can possibly do it. And if there's no yield advantages, if there's increased costs for the farmers, the only advantage is that if you continue to have an agricultural system that forces an exodus from the land, and believe me, this is part of that puzzle, the control of the seed and making farmers dependent on these companies for that seed, then it's advantageous only in so much as it allows those few that remain to perhaps cover a bit more ground. But that's it.
And what about health issues? Is there a point where you can get the general public involved in this and take this debate, which is up here down to the grassroots?
Well, I think that that has been central since the debate has started around the GM crops, is that the public has been concerned about the long-term consequences, both health, the socio-economic consequences, and the environmental consequences. And there hasn't been adequate studies, there hasn't been adequate debate. There's been a headlong rush to adopt this in North America in particular. The populations there and where we export our products, we don't know the long-term effects. And all I would say is that, when the first internal combustion engine sputtered to life about 150 years ago, I'm sure you could have, if someone would have spoke up and said, this is going to alter the climate of the planet, this is going